Okay. So welcome everybody. We've already got a great turnout, which is fantastic. I'm Kelly Mortimer. I'm the communications director for SEPAC SOMA, and I've, had two kids in this district for one's out now. He's in college, but for 16 years, I think I've been doing this dance since the oldest was 3 with his IEP. So um, we've got our president, Nicole Josie, here. I don't know if you want to say anything, Nicole, but let her
Yeah.
say a couple words, and then we'll move into Stephanie, who is going to take us through this immense topic. Um, Stephanie is an executive functioning coach. She's also a former, I would just say, former parent in this district, because you have successfully gotten all of your children out. Congratulations. If everybody could mute, would be great.
Sorry.
That's okay. Nicole, you want to go ahead and say something?
Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Nicole Josie. As Kelly said, I am the president of SEPAC SOMA for this school year, 25 to 26 school year. I have 2 kids in the district with IEPs. One is actually out of district now, and one attends South Orange Middle School. Been around the block for a really long time as well as Kelly. Not as long as Kelly, but around the block. So today, this is our December community meeting, and we thought it was really important to focus on executive functioning. We had an in-person meeting with Stephanie at the end of last school year, and it was just really, really impactful, really supportive of the families that were able to attend. So we said, how can we make this bigger, have more people join? And so that's why we decided to do it virtually this year, so we can get more people that would be able to get online and hear some of all these good nuggets that Stephanie has for us today. So I am going to turn it over to Stephanie Cannon.
I just unmuted. Hi, guys. Thank you so much for having me. Everyone can hear me, I assume. Okay. I'm happy to be here. Yes, I am a former parent. Both of my children are out. It's very weird to be a grown up without a school calendar to worry about. I don't know when there's a snow day. It's the craziest thing. It feels kind of liberating, but also very weird, because as a teacher, I've been tied to a school calendar forever. And ironically enough, the year after my kids leave, I go back to working as a school employee. So now I'm an administrator in New York City, and I do educational support in the school there. And I work with teachers, and I do workshops for those parents on executive functioning. And so I'm happy to be here. And I feel like this is just in my brain all the time. I am a very, organized, strong executive functioning person, but I have a tremendous amount of empathy for those who struggle. So I am the Monica Geller who color codes everything, but I also completely understand that that is not everyone's jam. And you know what? I have tremendous weaknesses in areas where other people have strengths. So it's all just, we all have our strengths and our weaknesses. And so the empathy piece comes very easily for me. So to start, I just wanted to go through a little slide presentation that I keep just to sort of define the key terms as I see them and as I use them. I don't want to monopolize the conversation. I want to open it up to all the other people. I know we had a handful of questions that were sent to us ahead of time, so I can hopefully kind of cover those, but then I would like to open up the conversation so that it isn't just all about me, speaking at you, but more facilitating a conversation among you. So I'm going to share some slides. I'm going to kind of sweep through them just for the purposes, like I said, of defining some terms so that we can all have common language and see the various categories. And then we'll all talk together. So you'll see the first slide is just the title slide. This slide is just a definition slide, right? So we know executive functioning skills refer to the whole set of skills and mental processes that enable us to do a whole host of things: social, academic, work, life, prioritize, plan tasks, focus, sustain our attention, remember instructions, problem solve, change approaches when needed, organize our ideas, organize our materials, complete tasks alone, and then also work with others, which, the social component of executive functioning is one of the most fascinating pieces to me. This is important for every part of life, from work to school to relationships. Neurologically speaking, the brain has 3 main areas of executive functioning: all of the things I'm going to talk about today, every slide either connects to attention, it connects to working memory, or it connects to cognitive flexibility. So even though there's going to be other domains in here, the three that are like neurologically, like physically part of the brain are these three: our attention, our working memory, and our cognitive flexibility. All the others are adjacent and tangential or underneath these three, because these are the three like that actually have parts of the brain dedicated to them. So here's the list that I'm talking about. We have some that I consider cognitive skills, right? You'll see the list. I'm going to go through each of these very briefly just to define them. Then I have some that I consider more emotional skills. That would be more the, the self-regulation, the big feelings, that kind of stuff, the grit, the endurance. As I define each of those, I'm also going to try to think of a list of questions. And if I can address anything that was in our list of questions that was sent ahead of time, I'll kind of throw it in there. And if I don't get to something you asked, then please, when the conversation starts, just, let me hear about it. The first one I always start with is organizational skills, because that's the most concrete and obvious to all of us, right? Are we organized? Do we have the ability to, arrange and maintain our materials, but also our ideas in an orderly way, right? So we have our organization of our materials, right? We have our silverware drawer where we have forks, we have knives, we have spoons. We have our, dresser where we have shirts, pants, whatever. Maybe your kid's room is a hot mess and needs some physical organization. That's the most concrete, but also the organization of our ideas is considered part of executive functioning as well. And a lot of people forget that, and that probably comes into play a lot with getting stuff done, schoolwork, tasks, errands, etc. But organization of any kind. Currently now we're also all adding digital organization, right? What does your desktop look like? Is your desktop full of random files? Do you have them in folders? Do you know what your cloud is organized like? What does your Google Drive look like, right? When I talk to people about, they sigh because they're like, oh, it's just one more thing now I have to organize. Besides my physical space, I'm now organizing, my cloud. It's overwhelming, but it all ties in. So that's the first one. Are we organized? Do we know where our materials are? Can we get to them? Can we use them efficiently? And do we put them back when we're done? Planning and triage is the ability to think about the future, not just be in the moment, and then create a list of steps to get us from where we are here to that thing we want to do down the road. We also have to decide what steps are involved, what order those steps have to take, and be flexible enough to reorder those steps along the way should we need, to do that. That's a pretty complicated one. And it has lots of implications as you're thinking about it. I'm sure you can see where that falls into your life. Time management is another fairly straightforward one, right? Are we on time? Can we get to appointments on time? Can we complete tasks on time? Can we,
Was she describing what executive functioning is, right?
Yes, I just got on the same way you did.
Oops. I'm just going through all the various subtopics under the umbrella, just to bring you up to speed. Time management, can you be on time for things? Can you allot enough time between now and when you have to be somewhere to get dressed and get out the door and get the travel in? Can you, when you cook, do you, plan everything so that it all ends up on the table at the same time? There's a whole host of places where this comes in, right? For our kids, I don't think they're cooking, but I want to honor the adult experience too, because a lot of people will talk about their own adult experience. The next one is task initiation. This one is really important, and one I hear a lot of complaints from parents about. Their kids can't get started on something, right? They procrastinate, they put it off. Task initiation is the ability to just do it, right? The Nike slogan is just simplest explanation. It is very hard for some people. There's a whole host of, magical thinking and justifications and procrastinations that go through the brain of someone who struggles with this. And it really gets in the way of a lot of other things, because getting started on something is the first step to a lot of the other executive functioning skills that come after, right? If you don't start it, then due dates don't matter. If you don't start it, then, planning it out doesn't matter. Getting going is sometimes the biggest hindrance for some people. And getting past that is a very successful thing to be able to do, because it opens doors for a whole lot of other successes in other areas, right? This one is called metacognition. It literally means thinking about thinking. But metacognition is reflecting on yourself, knowing what am I strong in, where am I weak, knowing how to tweak what you're doing in response to the feedback you're getting from a situation, right? Making adjustments along the way, monitoring your progress. It's a lot of school-based tasks, but a lot of life-based tasks involve metacognition too, right? Being able to monitor your process and your approach to something. Working memory is one of those ones that is on the slide at the beginning. That's one of the core parts of our brain, but it's also a domain in of itself, because especially students, but also all of us as adults, we need the ability to retain, store, and retrieve information to get tasks done. That means we have to know where we remembered something in our brain, how to go get it, how to pull it out, and how to apply it to a situation. It's everything from the formulas they need to do math, to the mnemonics their teachers give them to remember, the planets in order, to the rules that students have to apply for, sounding out words, doing different phonemic awareness activities, spelling. What are those strategies? What are those pieces of information? Multi-step math problems. I got an answer. Now I have to take that answer and put it in the next step. But you got to remember the answer to carry it over, etc. There's so many working memory elements in school, and for some children they really struggle. So this is one that I've worked on a lot with students, because it really is such an important academic piece, in addition to just, if you can't remember, we don't all have to remember phone numbers anymore, but if you're old enough like me, I used to know 27 people's phone numbers. That's an example of working memory. You want to talk to someone, you have to pull up those 10 digits that are associated with them. We don't have to do that anymore. But that's an old school example of, a working memory that adults used to have. Let's wrap up the cognitive ones with cognitive flexibility. This is literally the ability to have that spontaneous, moment of going, wait, I got to change course. Being okay with changing course. Being okay that there's a roadblock in your way that you have to rethink. Solving, switching the problem solving technique and being comfortable with it, not getting upset that it isn't going the way you thought, being the flexibility to know that change is okay, that we have multiple ways we can do anything, and that if we keep going in the same direction and it's not working, we're wasting our time and we have to pivot. There's also emotional cognitive flexibility on the emotional side of the chart, but I'll talk about that in just a moment. So these purple ones that I just went through are all the ones that I consider on the cognitive side of the chart, right? Now I'm going to move on to the green side, which is more the emotional regulation things. Self-regulation is that ability to have, power over your responses to outside stimuli. This is where we have our kids with big feelings, right? That's the emotional self-regulation that they struggle with. Stop, think, make a plan, don't react, act with purpose, think something through before you're in the middle of a response. And also some calming techniques if you find that you're getting overwhelmed, right? The next one is endurance. It's what it sounds like, the ability to just do something that's long and hard, and in most cases, not our favorite task. Can we suck up doing a thing we don't like, right? In school, we call these non-preferred tasks, but we all have them even in adult life. Can we just do the thing and get all the way to the end of the thing we don't necessarily want to be doing? For the most part, we don't struggle with endurance when we're, doing our favorite hobby. But that's kind of goes back to that question a lot of families asked about, resistance and avoidance to strategies. It sometimes is an endurance question. Self-control and inhibition, a little bit ties back into that self-regulation, but it's a little bit more specific in that, are we controlling our impulses? Are we able to sort healthy choices, unhealthy choices? Are we able to resist temptation, resist distraction, remove ourselves from situations that we know are going to be counterproductive, and put ourselves in situations where we know that we're going to make a conducive environment to getting tasks done, to answering without impulsivity, to being successful in any of the other domains. So this is a pretty foundational thing that sometimes can be what foils the other skills from being successful, right? The endurance of finishing a terribly long homework assignment may be foiled by the fact that, you know, if you don't turn your notifications off on your phone and your Instagram keeps stimulating you, your self-control is going to be taxed. And then whether you have endurance or not won't matter, because you won't get to the end of that assignment because of the distractions you're not avoiding. So a lot of these will kind of connect and weave into one another and feed off of each other, which I know does not help, but it also does help when you solve one, because then it also can sometimes contribute to solving another. So let's see, the last couple are frustration tolerance, the ability to manage those big feelings, frustration, you know, impatience, etc. This is also, you know, the moments where we have grit, right? Can we persevere through setbacks when we've done that same math problem 3 times, or we've tried to file our taxes for an hour and a half and, you know, the program's not working, or the problem keeps getting the wrong answer, or you've done the writing paper, you know, you've been writing the essay for a week and you have more edits. Can you just hold it together, not judge yourself, give yourself compassion, allow yourself to have a growth mindset, work through the mistakes, the edits, the whatever, and not lose your emotional stability in the process of being frustrated? That is a skill in and of itself. And then a very, very important one that I put at the end, but certainly it shouldn't be last, is self-advocacy, the ability for a student to effectively and appropriately express their needs and wants and know who to ask for help and how to ask. It can be, you know, how to communicate. Communication is another big part of executive functioning, proactive communication, reaching out, and then also being responsive in communication. And that's like very deeply connected to self-advocacy, because you have to communicate with teachers, parents, coaches, etc., to get the help you need and let them know where you are, because people don't read each other's minds. And a lot of the things that happen with our kids who have executive functioning issues is they don't communicate and they assume everyone can just know what's going on. So that's my quick run through of just the definition so that we all have some common terms. What do we think about questions that came in versus questions that we might have right here on the spot? What do you think is the best to, Kelly? Oops.
Do you have a little bit more you want to go through slide wise, or?
I have a couple of more slides, but I'm just being very mindful that I don't want to monopolize the whole conversation. I'd rather kind of respond. Like I have a couple slides about like what's appropriate at different ages.
Oh, I think that's great.
Okay, great.
I think it helps if we all, like, a lot of those questions might be answered.
Fair,
once you
fair.
get through your slides, right?
I'm always just mindful of not hearing myself talk for too long.
Like you said, it's a huge topic.
Yeah.
So having that kind of big picture overview just can help.
Happy
right
to
off the
do.
bat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this slide I created for a workshop that I was doing for some of the parents, and they're where I work, and I've done it for other parents too. And it basically just, parents will often say like, what's the right expectation to have for a student at different ages? So this slide is a very, very small like sampling of skills at different ages, right? Preschoolers, we're not expecting them to initiate most executive functioning skills between 3 and 5 years old, right? They're not in charge of any part of life. We tell them when to eat, we tell them when to go to bed. We're instructing them on everything. They have no autonomy, but really they can't drive a car. They can't do anything for themselves without us. So to expect them to have independent executive functioning skills isn't really part of the formula. When kids are 3 to 5, what looks like executive functioning skills for them is things like, how do they use planning and organization in their play? Like, right, how do they, do they clean up when told? Of course, they're not going to necessarily initiate it, but can they clean up when told? Do they have a plan for their play? When they're with their friends, do they make plans, right? You be this character and I'll be this character, and then we'll make hats and we'll, act out this play. Like, that isn't evidence of them having some sort of executive functioning skills in their brain, because it's almost always going to be play oriented at this age. Inhibition, I'm sure you can all remember your kids when they were younger, when to talk, when not to talk, when to whisper, when to be quiet, things to say, not to say in certain situations, how not to tantrum, how to work through big feelings appropriately when disappointed. That's all very appropriate for those ages. Do we expect them to necessarily know that that's what they're doing? No. But these are skills that that exist and are in their root forms at this age. For example, task initiation. It's time to brush your teeth, right? They're not going to know, but when you suggest it, they can willingly and successfully, go along. Making transitions is a huge one, right? It's time to turn the TV off. It's time to clean up. It's time to go to bed. It's time to leave your friend's house. It's time to go to grandma's. It's time for dinner. All those moments where they might not want to stop what they're doing and move on to something else. These are all the roots of bigger skills that will come later. But as far as sort of instilling good things in our preschoolers, a lot of it is going to be us modeling, them seeing us use a calendar, them seeing us transition from thing to thing successfully, them seeing us clean up and organize our own materials, talking about making a list to go to the store so we don't forget anything. Just using a lot of modeling and self-talk so that students see that being an adult looks like that and all the skills that it will incorporate. Of course, when you move on to elementary school years, it's going to get a little bit wider, a little bit more in their laps rather than all on us, but not entirely. Their ability to sustain attention for all their classes during the day. That's another example of something that is an improvement on an executive functioning skill, right? When they're little, their attention span is one length. As they're getting older, they're 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. They're sitting through 40-minute classes. They're starting to use working memory. They're starting to have strategies in school. They're starting to have to remember what they learned yesterday and bring it to, the work they're doing today. In school, they have their own organizational, schemas with their classrooms. Where do we keep our folders? Where do we keep our Chromebooks? At home, they can be involved in organizational tasks like emptying the dishwasher, folding and putting away their own laundry. And yes, they can do this in these grades. I get a lot of people whose kids are in high school and they're like, when do I teach them how to do laundry? And my answer is when they're like 8. I definitely promise you, if you give your kids a big laundry basket full of socks, put them in front of the TV at 5 years old and say, just match up the pairs. That is a really great age appropriate skill for a young kid to do, and they're helping. Then when they get a little older, you might fold all the laundry and you might sort it: shirts, pants, socks, pajamas, put it in a basket and say, it's all sorted, go put it in the right drawers, that kind of thing. Those are small steps where we start to give it to them, right? You might have to initiate it, but they can carry it out. Planning and triaging. I don't know, when they're in elementary school, do they want to learn how to bake cookies? A simple cookie recipe is a great way for planning and triaging to happen. Following a recipe is a really great way to show them that there are steps that you have to follow and that there's timing involved. In middle school, task initiation, the things they do on their own, they get up, they get dressed for school, they put their pajamas on, all the things they can just do now that they're not babies anymore. And they still might need guidance or boundaries, but you can say, hey, go do your morning routine. We're leaving in a half hour for school. And they know that means brush teeth, shoes, socks, underwear, pants, shirt, brush hair, all the things. And they can start all those tasks. Do you maybe have to make a list for them so they don't forget? Sure. But once they know what the task is, they don't need you to itemize it out for them. They can start to just do these things on their own. Metacognition is another one that comes into play a little bit more in elementary school, again, because they're in school, they're being asked to reflect on the way they are as students, and that will get enhanced. And I encourage parents to talk about that too, right? What'd you do at school today? What was your favorite part? What was the hardest part? What can you do if this is hard, right? That growth mindset language, that it's not a finite thing, that you're bad at math. No, you can improve. Growth mindset says, if math is hard for you, okay, so let's talk about it. What's hard about it? And what can we do to maybe, push the needle forward? And then the other one here is inhibition and self-control, again, is starting to refine itself. They have more empathy. They have more, ability to hold their thoughts until an appropriate time. They raise their hand, they wait to be called on, all of those things. Again, at this age, we're still doing a lot of guiding. We're not just modeling, but now we're sort of delegating, right? When they're little, we model and we set a good example. At this age, we're modeling, setting a good example, but then we add delegating, right? Go do this, go try this, kind of starting to hand it over to them. And then from 13 to 15, I would actually edit this to say probably 13 to 20. we're looking for them to have that more abstract and flexible thinking, see lots of different points of view. Obviously, their content they're studying will just naturally become more abstract at school, but also just in their relationships, be more understanding of people's different ways of seeing things, perceiving a situation, planning for the future, right? In high school, we start talk about, do you want to go to college? Do you want to work? Are you interested in a gap year? What sports are you interested in? Do you want to join the play? Just that idea of making a plan for the future, whether it's short term or long term. And then again, a lot more self-monitoring and emotional regulation, because we know how teenagers can be. And at this point is when we start to hand over even more responsibility. We give them that Power School and Google Classroom, and we tell them, go find out what zeros you have. Go find out what assignment is due this week. Every Friday, I expect you to put out the garbage, and I don't have to remind you. It's just your Friday task. And we just hand them a little bit more and a little bit more.
Okay,
So this is just a list
I'm
of
trying to listen to my thing. I'm sorry.
And a lot of parents ask me like how that handoff goes. So I try to just show you the arc of how it can start as modeling and end up where they really own it. And I've lived through it. I have one child who is very good and one child who very much struggles. So I've seen both versions. So anyway, that is that part of the situation. I think I would like to, open the floor to questions so I can hear like maybe more specific personal needs, but you tell me if there's anything else you want me to talk about before we do that.
I have a quick question kind of for a framework for this group of people, because,
Yeah.
we're obviously the Special Education and Parent Advisory Committee. So, most of the parents here have kids who probably have ADHD or another learning disability. In terms of like the timing of this development, do you find that it's typically kids who have some sort of disability that do they still fit into this time frame, or is the early to mid
Is it
adolescent
delayed?
development or like 16 to 22? Like
It can be. I mean, even people we consider typically developing, there is not a hard and fast age, right? It's not like they turn 12 and, obviously it's not automatic. I do find that in my experience as a teacher and even as a parent, like there's some benchmarks that I feel like you'll see the changes match up with more than really ages by number. So for example, I noticed that if you notice your kid is starting to go through adolescence in middle school, some kids, start that physical adolescent change when they're 10 or 11. Other kids really don't start to look, so adolescent until they're almost 13. I often find that you can be guided kind of by if their body is changing and they are naturally changing. It can kind of be that cue to like, okay, we're in that next phase. I can maybe up the ante a little. I can expect a little more. I can add a little, more delegation to them. And same thing with some of the younger ages, right? Like when you see them leaving that like really primary grade, even like, early childhood energy, and they're going more into that like big kid energy, it's almost like you almost feel like a chemistry in your kid changing. I don't know if that's just me, but that to me always felt like the right signal to sort of say, oh, okay, now I don't have to necessarily tell you everything. If I say you going from that early childhood energy to that like bigger kid energy, that was sort of the cue for me to be like, oh, okay, I think it's time for me to go from cueing everything and modeling everything and just being an example to saying, here, why don't you try, right? As teachers, we always use this analogy or this saying called I do, we do, you do, and it's a way we teach teachers to kind of structure their lesson plans. And it's, I do means I demonstrate, I show, I model, I teach. We do means together we practice and we investigate this. And then you do is, okay, go ahead, take that same thing that I modeled and then I practiced with you and now take it, see what you can do with it. And there's going to be mistakes along the way and it's never going to be perfect. But that's an analogy I often say to parents, like you can model the way you kind of transition your kids through these from the I do phase to the we do phase, which would be that middle delegating phase, to the you do phase, which is that adolescent and college phase, high school, college, where we really try to hand it off to them. And that's, for the most part, the painful part, because when we hand it off to them and they drop the ball, the natural consequences can really be a little troublesome. But I find that natural consequences are also very instructive. So we as adults have to kind of put our big girl and boy pants on and let those natural consequences happen sometimes. We don't want them to fall through the cracks, but sometimes we have to let things sting a little, because sometimes that is actually the game-changing thing that makes a kid go, all right, fine. And I realize I have to, listen to you, mom, and write things down, or whatever it is they're resisting in this domain. So that's how I see that arc. And of course, yes, there is no single age where everybody's changing at the same time. I have seen kids over the years, even with, ADHD or other diagnosed disabilities, be very on par with their peers. It really depends on the, emotional and kind of physical maturity that the kid themselves is going through. Does that help? I hope.
Yeah. So before we get too far into questions, just a couple of housekeeping things. I'm going to put the sign in the chat again. So if you haven't signed in already, please do so. If when you get to the sign in form, if you already get emails from us, I don't need your email again. If I see it, I have to check it and see if I have it. So it saves me the step of checking it if you know you already get emails from us. So for questions, let's do this. You can either raise your hand to ask a question, and we'll just kind of go around and find people with questions. If you don't want to speak, you're more than welcome to obviously put it in the chat. You could also message it to Nicole or myself, which is I'm under the SEPAC SOMA label in the chat. But yeah, let's open it up to see what everybody wants to ask. Stephanie, why don't you stop sharing so we can.
Oh, sorry about that. I meant to do that. I'm reading over some of the questions we got earlier, so if need be, we can always.
Oh, that's a good place to start, probably.
Yeah. Okay. Is there someone raising their hand that would want to go now, or do you want me to just go through some of the questions?
I don't see any hands up.
Okay, so I'm just going to go through some of the questions that we got in advance, and that way maybe they'll hit, for a number of people. Let's see. There's one that says, how can we make this work for a child who is resistant to lists? I would say there's many ways you can I'm assuming lists are reminders, right? Tasks that have to be accomplished. Sometimes lists are overwhelming because when they get very long, they can be defeating, right? I'll never get to the bottom. That self-regulation kicks in, the big feelings kick in, the procrastination kicks in. So I sometimes tell people, don't make lists, maybe make a calendar and divvy up the tasks across, the week, the month. And then what you're doing is you're saying, well, today is the 10th, so I'm only looking at the box of the 10th, right? So now instead of 7 things, you have 2. It can make it a little bit more accessible in case you do have someone who's resistant to lists, if that's the issue for that person. Sometimes the overwhelm is. Another reason person might be resistant to lists is because they're like, there was a question here about, how does ADHD and dyslexia tie into this? If you do have a kid with dyslexia, lists might not be their favorite thing. They might not be a confident writer. They might not want to put down their tasks in writing. Maybe their writing is hard to read. Maybe they don't always spell things correctly. So maybe sometimes, voice memos or things that can be digitally generated, notifications that can, come to them on the phone. I know a lot of parents are torn about using digital notifications because we're all trying to get our kids off the phones, but I'm a fan of whatever works. So there's a couple of reasons that someone might not like lists. Post-its are also helpful on the mirror in the morning so that it's, again, a very finite number of things and we don't have the overwhelm of this huge long set of things that have to be accomplished. I guess I always just encourage people to be creative and just try everything until you find the thing that fits. And lists might not be it for a person, right? Did have a client once who a calendar was much more suited to this person because then they could just isolate one day at a time and kind of live more in the moment. And it really did help with overwhelm. So that's the first answer that comes to mind for that one.
I
We
kind
have
of find in
another,
our own house, we definitely run
yeah,
into that. And it's there's also that element of like, I know mom, I already
yeah,
know that, you know, so
yeah,
it's that maturity
yeah,
or kind of where they are developmentally
yeah.
where they're like, they don't think they need to make a list because they're going to remember. And you're like,
And they're
"Mm,
when they were younger and they could, because their life was so much simpler, they
right,
can't imagine a scenario in which the complexity causes them to have to change. And there's that cognitive flexibility, right? When the strategy
yeah,
no longer works, can I pivot? Well, yeah, when you're 6, you can remember the 3 things you have to do, but now you're 16 and you have 11 things. So pivot. And they don't want to pivot because, by the way, you didn't know this, but you're all dumb and you don't know anything. And I too am dumb and I don't know anything either. So yes, that I don't have a solution for. I have not solved that exactly, but yes, I agree with you on that. Was there a hand up? I thought I saw a hand.
Yeah, I had a hand up. I'm Jason. Thanks so much for
Oh, hi,
this.
Jason.
I have a son who's in 6th grade at SOMS who has central auditory processing disorder, ADHD. Um, he, do you have any? I think this is kind of drafting off the first question, and I hope the answer isn't just keep trying stuff. Any tricks or formats for a child who doesn't want anyone to know that he needs like a printout on his binder, doesn't want anyone to see that.
Mm-hmm.
Again, says, "Oh, I don't need the schedule." It has a hard time tracking, along with I think many parents, Canvas, what's due when, how is it due. We've really been struggling with his teachers and with our IEP, and just curious if you had any kind of tangible, here's a couple formats that work. um he will often say, "Oh, I did that," and even though he didn't, and so we're just kind of
Mm-hmm.
constantly in this struggle. I assume other parents too, but just curious your perspective and any thoughts.
Well, it sounds like if he has auditory processing disorder, then the idea that he's going to remember what he is told and remember what he hears is a pipe dream, right? And
Yeah,
I say that with
doesn't
all due
happen.
respect, right? I'm
Yeah.
simply just speaking frankly.
Yes,
So
agree. That's how
there's
it is.
there's an understanding maybe he needs to have about the nature of his disability or his relative weaknesses, so that it isn't a judgment, it isn't it isn't punitive. These are things like in the analogy, do you have any friends who wear glasses? Well, yeah, of course you do. Do we judge them? Do we spend any time thinking about people who wear glasses? No, they wear them, the glasses help, we move on. You don't remember the things you hear. So yes, there is going to be a checklist in the front of your binder. And that is why it is the glasses you need, right? So almost a paradigm shift has to happen. And yes, I know they don't listen, but sometimes we just have to keep leading the horses to the water. And I know that's a very unsatisfying answer as a parent, because again, I do have a child who does not have great executive functioning skills, and I know the exhaustion that it can bring. But I think sometimes we have to like demystify what is going on with them and make it again a growth mindset conversation. This is not you having like a deficit. There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing, if you had glasses, if you needed glasses, we would get them for you and you wouldn't think anything of it. So why is this any different? Sometimes we just have to kind of change their point of view and perspective on it. And then we have to put our leadership pants on and say, this is not negotiable. You cannot do it this way. This is the glasses of your situation. And so there will be a checklist, and no one cares, because in middle school, they're all so self-absorbed. They're all thinking about themselves. No one is looking at your binder. Everyone is worried about if their hair looks okay or whatever. And I've literally found that to be true over the years. And my own children actually reflect on that now and say, I used to be so worried about what everybody was thinking in middle school. And now I realize no one was even looking at me, because they were all just obsessed with themselves and worried about what people were thinking of them. So I feel like my own kids gave me some wisdom in that regard. But I think we also have to make our kids tolerant of their own idiosyncrasies, right? And again, is that a quick fix I'm offering you? No. So I think a checklist in his binder is a great idea. I think a checklist in the mirror on the mirror in the morning for the 5 steps he needs to take to get out of the house in the morning is a great idea. I think a checklist in the kitchen for, whatever he has to do in the kitchen is a great idea. Like put them all over the house and refer to them often and live by them, and make it like glasses. We use it because we need it. It's that simple. If I were working with a family, I would probably come up with, templates that were very specific to a kid. But just generally speaking, that's kind of what comes to mind in your situation. Middle school is tough. I understand that they don't listen. They think they know, and they're very worried and anxious about what everyone else is thinking. But getting in concert with the teachers is also super important. And that's another question I think that was on the list. Building relationships with teachers is something I cannot underscore enough. Supporting them, reaching out to them all the time, not just to be mad, but to also be grateful. Even the ones you don't think you like very much, killing people with kindness goes a long way, even if they're not your favorite person. Thanking them, I can tell you that I think my relationships with teachers were one of the reasons that I was able to avoid some of the mishaps that some of my neighbors and friends had getting their kids through school. And I think it was something I stepped in by accident and then realized, wow, this is really it's important capital to have a great relationship with teachers, even the ones you think you don't like, because I actually myself have been proven very wrong. And in the end, been like, wow, I didn't like that teacher at first, but in the end, they were really good for my kid. So when you get on board with them, then you have this, consistent loop of your kid really just having everyone on the same page. And that's also invaluable at this point, which I know is obvious, but it bears repeating.
Stephanie, we do have some questions over in the chat. You want to take a look, or I can read them? What do you prefer?
Yeah, you know what? Hold on. Because I don't do WebEx. Hold on. Chat.
Down in the bottom right, there's a little speech bubble.
Yes, I see it. Thank you. I use other things, so hold on. Let's see. Sign in. Sorry. Let's see. I will share slides. Someone asked about that. Sorry.
Yeah, we can post that on the SEPAC site.
Avoidant and dishonest behavior, that is just it. Not just, that sounds like I'm minimizing it, but that seems to be like a person, a child, a student whose sense of self is very frustrated and they seem very defeated. But I see you're talking about, the best way to deal with an avoidant or student that then turns into a student that's not telling the truth. But like you said, you have Canvas, so you can reality check them. A suggestion I have is every single day, make a 5-minute period where you sit down and you go over Canvas, Google Classroom, for school, whatever it is, all at the same time. You spend 5 minutes just doing a little inventory, right? Great, you handed that in, you got a B, super. Okay, this one is a 0, says missing, let's write it down. Just doing an inventory every day. Is it tedious? Yes, it is. But it can almost become soothing and probably could maybe lower your kids' stress level a little bit, to know that that's just like part of your routine, potentially. I know that they avoid because it's just easier to pretend things don't exist, but we as adults know that those things are going to find them at some point. So if you just don't make it a big deal, just sit down and almost, again, like the way you would empty the dishwasher, it's just something we do every day. It doesn't have a value assigned to it. We're not freaking out. We're just going to go and collect data. We're going to say, okay, what's in, what's late, what needs to be chased and handed in. We do it. We don't do it with a lot of emotion. Very, very matter of fact. And then we have this little list to follow up on tomorrow. You can even potentially sit with your student and have them send emails to the teacher in that moment saying, oh, dear Mr. So-and-so, I see that I have a missing assignment. Can I hand it in tomorrow? Right? Then you're teaching them also that proactive communication to acknowledge they know they have something missing. I'll bring it in tomorrow. Or, oh, Mrs. Smith, I thought I submitted that essay. Can you get back to me because I, thought I submitted it and it's not showing. So it becomes maybe a 15-20 minute exercise every night. but perhaps it can take some of the stress off, and that avoidance will diminish when they know that each night they will kind of reset and not be in a hole. Not everyone will respond that way to it, but I think it might be worth trying. That was what I would say to that. There's a question about, oh, horrible test taker. Oh, I feel for the horrible test takers. That's a hard one for me to answer here because I need more questions. I have more questions about exactly what is hard. Like, is it memory? Is it concepts? Is it sequencing? Is it reading, writing? That one I don't know. I think you'd have to get to the bottom of what is keeping them from being successful on the test. And I know that's not very helpful because I don't know what that is, but I think that's your first step is it memory? Is it comprehension? Is it, is it the test itself? Is it they don't read the question? Is it an attention issue? There's a lot of things that I'd need to know in order to be able to answer that, unfortunately. So I'm going to put a pin in that one if you don't mind. I've heard a lot of people talk to me about we're a whole house full of ADHD people. So like, it's like the blind leading the blind. So I was saying earlier, I worked with one family where they took turns kind of being in charge of everything. So one person wasn't always having to have the stamina and endurance to make everyone accountable. So it was a family with high schoolers. So everyone was kind of mature, if you will. So, mom would be in charge on Monday, dad would be in charge on Tuesday, one kid would be in charge on Wednesday, et cetera. And by being in charge, it meant, if we all have ADHD and we all tend to forget the garbage, the chores, the homework, the check the mail, whatever it is, we had a team leader each day who would take on that responsibility for the day. The family had a list and a calendar. And so by rotating responsibility in that sense, not one person didn't carry the weight of it all the time, because sustaining that day over day is very hard, especially for people with ADHD. And the second half of this question talks about natural consequences in high school. They fail? Yes. Do I want your kid to be left in the wind long enough to fail out of high school? No, I do not. But that's where we can double back to that suggestion I had earlier about every single night we check Power School together, we check Canvas, whatever it is, and we kind of take a collection and make a list of the things that require our attention. So there are some natural consequences in that we're going to look at the screen and see some zeros or, low grades because of things we let slide, but we're not going to just continue to let them slide. We're going to say, oh, oof, those 3 zeros really hurt because last week I did not hand in homework on 3 nights. And then we can do something like be solutions oriented, right? Have that growth mindset. Can we email the teacher and see, will he or she still take those delayed assignments? Sometimes the teachers will, right? Many teachers in my experience would. Especially if your kid has an IEP or a 504, and very often they have accommodations for, extended time and flexible due dates. Take advantage of that, but don't take advantage of it as a safety net for not doing something. Take advantage of it as a reprieve when that natural consequence has kicked in, and go, okay, you know what? Let me email the teacher, child, not parent. You might be guiding them. Dear Mrs. So-and-so, I noticed that I, have 3 zeros from last week. I would like to complete them. I know, my grade might not be full, but I do get extended time for assignments. Would you be willing to take these, etc. But yeah, letting your kids see those zeros pile up, it hurts, but it's sometimes very motivating. But we don't want to just leave it there and then just, let them slide into, a failing grade for the year. But that's, again, where you have to build a relationship with the teachers. You have to get a dialogue going. You have to have a routine every night for checking Power School or Canvas or whatever it is. And it's annoying. I used to do it all the time, and I couldn't wait to be done with Power School, right? And then also that ties into teaching your kid how to go, oh, I got to reach out about that. Oh, I got to follow up on that. So all of the skills kind of come together in moments like that. And again, do we want to do this with our evenings? No, but unfortunately, it can lead to some positive self-esteem and more growth mindset. So it's definitely worth trying. And if you are worried about how much to dive in versus let them figure it out on their own, you are completely not alone. And I would say pull back and then jump, kind of jump forward if you feel like you've pulled back too far. I think ninth grade is a rough start because it's a transition year. It's the new year of high school. So I also think you should give yourself and your kid just a little more time to adjust. I would definitely say by the end of the year that, the transition should be over and they're be in the mix. But I do know that a lot of kids, every time they switch schools and go into a new grade, whether it's middle school, high school, they do have that first year where they're a bit like the deer in the headlights. So, I always remind people, give yourself a lot of compassion too. Don't be so hard on yourself and expect everything to be easy so quickly. It's really a marathon. I cannot underscore that enough. And I hate to be the bearer of that news, but it is. My son is 25 and he's still working on stuff. So, the part of the brain that has all these skills in it is the frontal lobe. And the frontal lobe does not finish developing. It's not even firmly developed in girls until they're 25 and boys until 26, 27 sometimes. So we all have a very long way to go, right? It's like Jello up there right now. Let's see.
Stephanie, we have
Go
this
ahead.
question. We have this question in the questions. That's kind of the question a couple of times. We've tried many different tools, but another problem is that she needs to be reminded that tools exist because she forgets. Yep. How do we help them use the tools independently?
So that's like another one of those things that the answer is going to maybe be ungratifying, but it's a function of a little bit of trial and error, which I know is exhausting to hear, but it's true. And a little bit of, there's a strategy called if then or when I, then I, where we try to associate things we want to remember to do by piggybacking them on like other things we already do. And I went to like a workshop about this, and one of the ways you can try to remember the tools or remember any of the strategies you want your kid to use for anything is to kind of pair it with something that is kind of already so in their wheelhouse to do. So there was a family who had a younger child, and they did an if then or a when I, then I, which means like, if I'm doing this, then I always do this, right? Which kind of prompts the memory of the student to engage with some sort of reminder, calendar, notification system, something they have to do, right? Some people call it when I, then I. It's basically the same thing, just two different little mantras to use. So this one family, the child was supposed to take medication every night, and they used the when I, then I to be like, when I brush my teeth, then I take my meds, because they were trying to get their kid to be independent about taking their meds, and the kid kept forgetting, and the whole thing would spiral. The kid would go to school without any meds. It wasn't a high school kid. I believe it was a middle school kid, but experimenting with ways you can piggyback, like the thing you always forget to do on top of a task you never forget to do, whether it's eat dinner, right? Or I don't know, like anything you have kind of down pat, kind of make it a two-part, so that maybe then and also you have to think small. You have to be willing to chip away very small, right? You can't expect to do 11 things at once. So if you can get one thing off the list by associating it with something else, that's great. And then you might have to use a different technique for some other battle you're trying to fight. A lot of times I also advocate that we make things big and loud and colorful and just hang them around and put them on the fridge, put them on the mirror, put them on the door as you're leaving the house, like anything. And who cares if it's, 18 by 24 and it's all in red lettering, like just make it unavoidable. Put it on the TV. I actually had one family that for a long time, they had chore lists on the TV, and the kids could only use the TV if the chore lists were done. They also used to take the remotes, which I know are a little passe at this point, but you could do the same thing with any screen, right? An iPad, a phone, a laptop. You would have to check out your device by handing in a completed homework list, chore list, whatever it was. It was almost like a library. Like you give me this, I give you the remote. You give me this, I give you, your iPad. kind of connecting things to other things, if that makes sense. And different ages, obviously, different expectations. But I also had a family at my job who did my suggestion of putting like big checklists and reminders in the various like obvious places where they would go, whether it's on the bathroom mirror or the door when you're leaving. And she actually emailed me the other day and was like, it's like changed our life. So for them, that actually really worked out. I know that won't work for everyone. And for people who don't like lists, you know, that is a problem. Sometimes using icons, little like more like pictures, right? Picture of your car keys, picture of your phone on the mirror, a picture of the medication you're supposed to take, or, you know, maybe that's more impactful. I don't really know, but that was a solution that someone that I used that I have at work used successfully. And I hate to say trial and error, but it really does kind of boil down to that a lot of the times. So yeah, I think, and as far as like schoolwork goes, as far as like the tools they're supposed to use for schoolwork, if they're organized enough that they have a folder for every subject, you know, for the papers that we still do use, a lot is digital, or even a digital folder that's also like color coded, right? So if your hard copy folder is red, then the file on your computer should also be red, and those are both going to be English. You know, if your folder for math is blue in real life, then the folder on the computer should also be blue. That's another way to sort of make associations through color and visuals, so that if your kid is, you know, knows that they have to do some homework and there's a, you know, a rubric in there, and they go to look for the rubric, they're not spending all of this time looking for the right subject, right rubric, they're mixed in with other subjects. And then they're more likely to use those tools, the rubric, the checklist, because it's easy to find. It's not, you know, buried at the bottom of the backpack. So a lot of these things kind of dovetail with other things. So I feel like I end up talking a little off topic, but it leads you there because they're so intertwined sometimes. Let me see if there's anything else in here. Oh, what's the phrase I just said? I said when I, then I, which is like when I brush my teeth, then I take my medicine. Or you could always do if then, which is more computer lingo, right? It's a coding thing. It's a computer programming phrase. So you could use the same thing. If I'm brushing my teeth, then I take my medicine, right? That's just the example that I was thinking of from somebody, but you can associate it with anything else. I personally use it around remembering to do something every night after I walk my dogs. So when I come home from work, I unavoidably have to walk my dogs. They will not be ignored. So when I walk my dogs, then I always check the mail, because I'm classically forgetting to check the mail. So that's another silly, simple example of like, when I walk the dogs, then I check the mail has now been linked together. The dogs will not be ignored. When I'm walking the dogs now, it is just part of my mental, like natural disposition to check the mail, because I've linked it to walking the dogs. It sounds silly, but these things do kind of start to add up if you can corral them. What else do we got? How can we support middle schoolers who struggle to keep track of their belongings, transitioning class to class? Yeah, that's tough too. I would say make it as streamlined as possible. Have as few items doing double duty. Maybe, you know, I know binders are like the worst, but like I'm a big fan of color coded folders, so that they know, you know, a color for every subject. Hold on, I want to read the end of that question. So that when they go from class to class, you know, they know I put the blue folder away, I'm done with that. I take the red folder out, I'm going to the next class. That's the red class. Never return any homework. That's if it's hard copy homework. My son used to do that. He would do a beautiful job on his homework, and then, you know, 2 days later it would still be in his folder, and I say, honey, it's like a tree in the forest. If you don't hand it in, you didn't do the homework, right? And so sometimes I would put, you know, a Post-it on it, or I would put, you know, we'd put a Post-it on it that stuck outside the what's it called, the folder, to be like more visible. We associated like when I, then I kind of technique, even though I didn't know the words for it back then. I would say literally the minute you walk in class, just associate walking in class with opening that folder and seeing what's in it. Took a long time, but eventually that kind of sunk in. It took a long time. You know, I would have to say, remember, the first thing you do when you walk in class is open the folder. You walk in classes, open the folder. I didn't have the when I, then I language, but it was kind of the same principle. And you're not there, so you have to hope they'll just do it. That's another way that the relationship with teachers can be helpful, right? If you consistently say, look, my kid is doing their homework, it's sitting in his folder, can you possibly make an announcement at the beginning of class to prompt? A lot of times the teachers will meet you halfway. I think they genuinely try. And I know teachers can be a source of frustration for a lot of parents, but they also have a lot of kids. All of our kids who have these issues are all in their class together. so that can be overwhelming for them, but it's all the little pieces of the puzzle when they come together. That's usually the solution. There's not usually one panacea. It's kind of hitting it from this angle, this angle, this angle, this angle, that usually, in my experience, gives you the most success. So, I'm trying to think. There was another question about, I don't know if anybody has this one still, but there was one question on the Google form about the more sensory, emotional regulation kinds of things, big feelings, and how to kind of pull those down in moments of frustration or overwhelm. One of the techniques that I love when I'm feeling a little dysregulated is to kind of bring myself, either back from the past, back from the future, wherever my worry is taking me, is the very simple 5 senses rule, where you stop everything you're doing and you just sit where you are and you try to identify one thing you can see, and you say, I can see the plant on the windowsill. One thing you can hear, I hear the alarm going off in the other room for the microwave, whatever. I smell, I don't know, somebody's perfume. I feel the corduroy of my pants. And very rarely can we taste, but the 5th sense is taste. If possible, you can say, like, I taste the minty toothpaste I used in my mouth this morning. Kind of bringing yourself back to having to identify 5 things, one for each sense, forces you to be in the moment. And often when you bring yourself back to the moment, your cortisol level will just naturally drop. Your head will stop spinning, and it's a very slow, usually, you'll find your breathing will relax. Again, is it going to work the very first time? No. I'm also a yoga instructor and a yoga practitioner person, and this kind of bringing yourself into the present moment and really letting all the other things go has taken me a long time to work on over the years. But that 5 senses thing has gotten me through some stressful moments, because when you're concentrating on identifying those things and naming them out loud to yourself, you'd be surprised at how centering it is and how other things will fall away. So that's like one little trick you could maybe send your kid out into the world with, that they can do it wherever they are, right? Because they can always name something they see, hear, smell, feel, and taste, wherever they are. And it's portable. So that's one I like to give people, because you don't need anything to do it, just yourself. I'm trying to think. I wrote down a couple of things.
Yes.
Go ahead.
So Melissa had mentioned a couple of times about how to find an executive functioning coach. And I will say from personal experience, the best thing I ever did was outsource it with my oldest kid, because he needed to hear someone else, not me, say it. And
Yes,
the guy says all the same things that I've been saying to him for years and years and years. But
and it's validating for you too as a parent, and we need that.
Right. To not come from the mom voice made all the difference in the world. So how can people find somebody to work with?
Here's the thing. There are not a lot of us. I was working for myself in private practice until I had this opportunity to try this job. So sometimes I miss it that I don't work for myself, because I really do like working with clients. But it's an answer, but it's not really an answer. Because there are not a lot of us, I've been doing this for 30 years. I've been a special educator since 1993, and I went to an executive functioning workshop like my 2nd year of work. And I've been working with kids with ADHD, autism, dyslexia, all the things for 30 years. So I know that I am a trained executive functioning expert, because 30 years is 30 years. I'm also finding through my work and through my relationships that a lot of people are just hanging out a shingle now saying they're executive functioning coaches, because it's a fancy way of saying you're a tutor. And I find that a lot of parents, because there are very few of us who have this long history, a lot of parents are, a person who used to call themselves a tutor is now calling themselves an executive functioning coach. And then the parents are finding out 6 months in that, really this person is just doing, regular old tutoring with your kid, not really any specific strategy work or ADHD coaching per se, right? Sometimes that's another term you'll hear. So my response to that would be, if you're going to interview someone or talk to someone, don't just ask them, are you, executive functioning coach? Don't just take their word for it, but ask them literally like what their background is and where they've been and what their training is. I mean, there's not a certification that makes you an executive functioning coach, but my training is that I spent 15 years in various classrooms making behavior plans, making checklists. Like this was my job, was to do this. So I would just say ask some really like critical questions of the people that you are interviewing, because I am finding that just so many people are just changing the word tutor on their business card to ADHD coach or executive functioning coach. You probably want someone who has a special ed degree, honestly. And I get asked all the time when people talk to me, and I don't really know another person. I know one other person that I would recommend, but she does not live locally. And I'm not to say that there are not other lovely, wonderful, really great people out there. It's just I don't know them. So it is hard, and I don't have an answer for that. I'll be honest with you, because when I got this job, I tried to refer a couple of my clients to new people, and I had a very hard time helping place them. So, I felt bad, but that is another way I learned that it is difficult. So I don't really have a great answer for that, unfortunately. But a person with a really solid special education background who's worked in very highly strategic classrooms probably is a good bet, at least to start. So maybe some of the special ed teachers in the district who maybe wanted to, to do some work outside of school might be, a good option. I just don't know how many of them do it. So, pardon. There was one last thing that somebody mentioned that I thought I'd give a quick tip to about procrastination and task initiation or putting things off. And this one also has worked well in my house and with some of my students. A lot of people, it's kind of a two-part solution. A lot of people procrastinate because we make a mountain out of a molehill. And the research is very, very clear that if you were to ask anybody how long a task takes, especially a non-preferred task, right, something you don't want to do, people almost always at least double the amount of time they think it's going to take. So there's a few things you can do. One's called reality testing, which is write down how long you think a crappy task takes. And you can do this with your kid too. Cleaning their room, I don't know, cleaning out the cat litter box, whatever it is, whatever task you hate, they hate. Sit down and you can make a game out of it. How long do you think it's going to take to do this annoying thing? Fold the clothes, empty the dishwasher, whatever. Do your spelling homework. And then do it. And when you do it, time it. Almost always, we vastly overestimate how long something is going to take us. And that is at the root of why we don't bother doing it or we put it off. So if you play that little game once or twice and you reality check yourself, it kind of makes you go, oh, yeah, I do always assume it's going to be a big, long thing and I don't have time. So why bother starting? So I'm going to push it off till tomorrow. And then in reality, it takes almost always about half the time you think. I've actually done that to myself on a couple of occasions and found that it is true. So that's one thing you can do. And if you make it a game, again, you're demystifying it for your kids. You're not making a value judgment that they're bad at this and they procrastinate. We're just looking at it straight in the face and going, yeah, this is the thing we do. Let's try to fix it. We're not going to beat ourselves up. We're just going to go, wow, look at that. Making the bed really didn't take 15 minutes at all. It took 4. Oh my gosh. Then why are we worried about it? The other trick that we can play on ourselves is called the 3-minute rule, which is, if you don't want to do something and you're dreading it, set a timer and promise yourself you only have to do it for 3 minutes. And when 3 minutes is up, you're allowed to stop no matter where you are in the task. The research also shows that if you start something and you get 3, 4, 5 minutes in, chances are once you've gotten over that hump, you won't give up the task and you'll just finish it. So that's another a trick that I used to do with one of the high schoolers that I worked with one-on-one, is because he never wanted to start math. He hated math. Never want to start math. I'd be like, all right, let's just set a timer. Let's do 3 minutes of math. And when 3 minutes of math is over, we'll stop. And a good number of the times we'd get to that 3-minute mark and he'd be 6 or 7 problems in and it wouldn't be as hard as he thought and it would be going pretty well. And I'd be like, should we stop? And sometimes he would say yes and I would honor it. And then I'd say, okay, you have to come back to it later. Fine. When you go home, whatever. But sometimes he'd be like, oh, it's fine. I only have 2 more problems. And we would finish that stupid worksheet. So there are some like little head games you can play with yourself for procrastination that I find are kind of lighten the mood around procrastination and are actually so effective. And I thought maybe I would finish with that one because that one's kind of accessible in a way that some of the other ones aren't. But yeah, and I've done them on myself, and I can tell you they work. So there's a lot of little head games we have to play with ourselves to get through this life. What else do you need? What else do we have to discuss? Questions? Anything else? Oh, Victoria's got something.
Susan had a question about how to get kids to clean up their room, how to put away clothes. I can answer that was my room.
Great.
And it's not, but it took until like now. So one day, I actually put away my clothes now, but it took many
For you.
many
I got to be honest, there are some times I live out of a laundry basket for several days and then I feel the shame of getting to the bottom of the laundry basket because that's one of my tasks that I just will move that laundry basket all around. And I don't have ADHD, but sometimes I just don't want to put that laundry away. So again, that's one of the tasks that I've timed because that's a thing I find myself doing. That was one of the tasks where I was like, damn it, I got to time myself because I keep swearing this is going to take forever. And really it takes like 3 minutes. So shame on me. But
my litmus test in college was when I didn't know what I was stepping on. And I would pick up my room and put it all away very perfectly until it all came back out again. But I don't do that anymore. So you can change.
Yeah, I'm telling you, like, we just all have to be patient and have a growth mindset and just chip away little bits at a time. If we try to take on 11 things, we're not going to get anything done. Just do the tiniest little thing and consider that progress good enough and then add something to it. But people really do have a hard time. They think a little progress isn't sufficient, right? We're hard on ourselves and our kids. But when we do set out to make a change, even if it is the tiniest one, we have to hold ourselves and we have to hold our kids accountable to get to the end of that to be successful. So we don't have to take big bites, but when we take a bite, we do have to chew it and finish it. So that's the only thing I would say is even if you set your goals to be tiny, don't let them languish because my mom used to say this, and I think this is valuable too. Kids have to trust us and they don't trust us just by us following through on the good stuff. They trust us most when we follow through on the tough stuff, like the punishments or the consequences. They have to know we mean what we say. So it doesn't just mean that if you promise ice cream, you deliver ice cream. You also have to follow through on if I say you're going to, do X or you're going to go to your room, then they have to go to their room because trust is built both through consequences and following through on the ice cream. And I remember hearing a psychologist talk about that and my mom always used to say that. And then I, had to give her credit and say, wow, Mom, you were really right. Because I thought that was impactful to think about it that way. That if you make threats and they're empty or you make consequences and they don't follow through, it actually is destructive to the kids' ability to trust us, which I think is really impactful for those days where we just think we don't have it in us to follow through. It can maybe help you say, you know what? Okay, I will, because I want my kids to trust me. So
are there any resources you would recommend for us? Like books, websites, TikTokers?
TikTokers. Social media is not my forte because I just feel like it's increasingly not dependable for anything.
Right.
Like it's just increasingly an unreliable source. And this is by no means a plug because I did used to work for a company and I don't love them, but they do have a good, the company itself, I didn't think was a great company to work for or to their curriculum. I didn't love, but they do have a set of like resources. I do get a newsletter from them and they do send I think it's monthly, maybe it's weekly. I'm not sure. It seems to vary. They do send sort of like blog posts or like monthly e-blasts with like little tips and tricks that I think are helpful. I can send you that. I'd have to find the name of like the thing to sign up for. I think can't remember the name of it because the company changed names. I can find it for you and I can send it so that
Okay.
you can send it out as a
And
resource.
we'll add it with our recap.
And then the other websites that I think are pretty reliable, you probably already know about, is like Understood. They usually have some good things. I'm trying to think. If you need like a list of websites, it's probably something it would be better for me to like send to you after so that I can kind of curate it carefully. Because I know of some that like over the years I've liked, but I would want to go and kind of like look and send you maybe a list of like 3 or 4. Understood, I feel like is always a good place to start. They give, really succinct, sort of clear explanations on things. But there's a few others whose names are escaping me. So if you don't mind, if I could send them to you, I'm happy to do that.
That would be fantastic. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, we've got about just a few more minutes. Other questions that anyone wants to ask?
I'm going to look in the list to see if there's anything. Tasks, procrastination. There's a lot of procrastination right now versus later. There's a question about transitioning. I'm always a big fan of timers for transitioning. Give 5-minute warning, set the timer. Little kids, I always let them choose the alarm sound, the duck quacking, the horn, whatever, just making it fun. For older kids, it's kind of just set the timer. Sometimes I even say like allow yourself 1 snooze. So say you're supposed to turn off, streaming something to go do homework, set an alarm, and if you want, allow yourself 1 snooze. But once you allow yourself 1 snooze, then it has to be 1 snooze, right? So I try to give a lot of gray area so that people aren't hard on themselves, but then there's also that accountability. So I did have one student that never could listen to an alarm until I let him know that he'd be allowed to have 1 snooze. And then for some bizarre reason, he suddenly was like, oh, it makes it so much better. I'm like, all right, well, 1, okay. Like it's the craziest thing, like what will work for someone, right? It can be so personal and not very rational, but that's why I keep saying, just don't ever give up, keep trying. Let's see, I'm looking through the list. Prioritizing, motivating to do things that are boring. Motivating to do things are boring kind of goes with the procrastination thing, but also once they start, sometimes kids have a hard time getting to the end. So there's this thing called the Pomodoro technique where you work for 20 minutes and you earn a 5-minute break, and you work for 20 minutes and you earn a 5-minute break. So, and you set a timer for these things, and the break is mandatory, and the break is 5 minutes, and you can walk around the house, you can get a drink, you can go pee, you can, have a snack. I usually rule out getting on Instagram or anything because those are such time sucks that your 5-minute break will be blown right out of the water. But the Pomodoro technique is super simple, and it usually can help with kids who find something boring and they might be able to start it, but they don't want to finish the whole thing. So knowing they have a break to coming to them every 20 minutes. And if they can't make 20 minutes, start with 15 or 10 and work up to, 20. But the fact that you make it this regimented, like I will have a break, I will get up from this task, I will walk around, I will get a drink, I will, pet my dog, whatever it is, they know that break is coming. It can be very incentivizing to just be like, okay, I only have to do this for 15 minutes, then I get a break. So that can be a little trick you use for that. And then transitioning, usually I find people struggle with transitions when they're abrupt and there's no warning. Even older kids, right? Little kids, we give 5-minute warnings all the time. But it's surprising that maybe, giving a warning, again, an alarm with a snooze. So now you heard the alarm, that was your warning. The 9-minute snooze is your like chance to come to terms with, and then, okay, fine. I'm going to get up and I'm going to move to the next task and start my algebra homework or whatever it is. That can be helpful even in older kids. Transitions are hard because change is hard. let's see, I think I hit most of the categories in this list. Let's see.
Yeah. Well, I think that
Okay.
wraps us up pretty much right on time. Stephanie,
Oh,
this was
perfect.
amazing.
I would
I
hope
think,
so. If there's anything I missed, I would love to hear from you.
well,
Get in
it's
the
such a
zone.
big
I hope
topic.
I'm not rambling.
It's
It's so
it's
much that it's hard to
so
break
much.
down. So I try, but I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, and every kid is so different, and what works for every person is so
Yeah.
different. But it's, you know, hearing different perspectives on how to shift your thinking about something, or a little tip or trick that you haven't thought of, is just incredibly helpful. And we really appreciate you taking a whole hour and a half
I'm
to get
totally happy.
through this.
I'm totally happy to have done it. And really the thing I always leave all my families with is, I know it can feel exhausting. And so the last thing I always like to say is be kind to yourself, be gentle on yourself, be firm with your kid, but also be gentle with them. It's hard to walk the line between being firm and hold accountable, but also gentle. So I find that if we start with ourselves and we give ourselves a little bit of a break, but also hold ourselves accountable, it kind of sets the tone for then how to do it with our kids, right? It's a hard line to walk. So that's another reason why I always say parenting's really hard. And that's why no one knows it's hard, because none of us would have kids if we knew how hard it was. So it's a weird little cosmic trick the world plays on us, that they don't tell you how terribly hard it is until it's too late. And, so we got to be nice to each other and to ourselves, because it's a long 25 years to get our kids to that frontal lobe thing. And, if I can make it, anyone can make it. That's all I'm going to say.
My 19-year-old, like, something clicked a little bit this year, sophomore year of college, and I'm
Isn't it
like,
crazy?
woohoo!
It's crazy, isn't
Yeah,
it? And it's a good
and
feeling,
I
and you deserve
never,
it.
yeah, did not think we would get there. And he still has many years to go, but
Yeah.
there was hope.
The first
Yeah,
time they
it's
say,
great.
Mom, you're right, it's like Christmas. So, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah,
everybody know it's coming. It's coming. It won't be like
yeah.
this
There is hope.
forever. It
And
was
this is a
lovely
kid
to
who's got
hear.
all of the things.
Yeah, and I will send you an email with the website ideas. And
Great,
then,
thank you.
if there's any questions after that.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank you so much.
everybody.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Great
everybody, for
Stephanie.
coming
meeting.
tonight. And we'll
Thank you
send out
so
a
much.
recap and a link to the meeting that you can go back and take a look at. And I'll get the slides from you too, Stephanie. It'll be
Oh,
great.
right.
Thank
Yeah. Okay. We'll connect
Awesome.
for sure. Good night, everyone.
Good night.